I recently heard a story that went something like this. Two friends from their college years got together for a hike in the White Mountains. They had been best friends since their early 20s, but their lives had taken them in two completely different directions. One was a mechanic in the South, and the other was an investment banker living in New York City. They were fit and athletic, experienced hikers, wise enough to pack plenty of food and water and rain gear and provisions. So they drove together, parked at the trailhead, and made their long and slow descent to the summit. They hadn't seen one another in a very long time, so they had a lot to catch up on. Then tragedy struck. The banker lost his balance and came down hard, badly twisting his ankle. So much so that even assisted, he really couldn't even walk. Neither of their cell phones, of course, had signal far away from a tower, and it was getting late. So exhausted, the two men just plopped down and covered up and decided to try to get some sleep, and then when it was light, start out again. Neither one of them were particularly worried because, again, they had plenty of provisions. After about an hour of darkness, the banker began to fall asleep, while his friend the mechanic grew increasingly concerned about his family. He said, "Well, I think my wife will be terrified since she hasn't heard from me, and I wonder if anyone will come looking for us." To which the banker replied, "It's stewardship season at my church. I pledge 10% of my income. Surely someone from the church will come and find me." Before I even begin to talk about stewardship, I want all of you to hear two words. There are two words that often come out of our mouths pretty automatically, but they're the same two words that when they're withheld can result in our feeling pretty hurt and pretty unappreciated. Those words, of course, are thank you. So I want to say thank you to all of you for who you are. And I want to say thank you for being faithful to God and to this community. So if you remember nothing more from this sermon than a bad joke, remember the words thank you, thank you, thank you. Of all kinds of prayers, it is the prayer of gratitude that is the most important prayer of all. And I think gratitude is a good starting point for a conversation about stewardship. So stewardship, when you hear that word, what comes to mind? You're all being quiet, great. Well, if you've been in church for a very long time, then I'm guessing that you think of how we use our time, our talent, and our treasure for God. And you would not be wrong. You might also hear those things described as wisdom, works, and wealth. I've heard stewardship for most of my life. In fact, I don't remember the first time that I can recall hearing the word. But I do remember reading a book that changed me. It was entitled Creating Congregations of Generous People. It's been around for a while, so perhaps some of you have read it. Maybe. So it was my first ever vestry meeting, and our priest went around and asked us who would like to read this book and give an update, like a book report, the next month. Dead silence. Nobody budged. So, of course, what did I do? To get rid of that uncomfortable and awkward silence, I raised my hand. And I read the book. And you know, for the first time, I actually made the connection between generosity, giving, my faith, my church, and my God. I really began to think about how I spend my time and where our family resources went. It sent me into a little bit of a spiritual crisis. Because truth be told, my giving was kind of erratic, mostly unplanned. Sometimes it was motivated more by guilt or fear than by true joy and gratitude. And being the helper type and being a mom, it was easy to give of my own time to the point of exhaustion. Years and years, decades even, of being part of a faith community helped me change that. The clergy and the people in my communities taught me and showed me in very, very practical ways what it looked like and what it felt like to be a good steward. I heard and I learned all the ways that they showed love to God, the ways they showed love to one another, and also how they gave their own bodies and their own minds adequate time to rest and be renewed. And so when they got together on Sundays, the whole service was about giving thanks to God. So I think stewardship is not a word that we should want to run away from. It's not simply a word that the church uses to ask its members for money to sustain it. Stewardship is more than a parish budget. It is much, much more than that. Stewardship involves all of our lives. Everything we have, everything we are, our bodies, our talents, our passions, our intelligence, our possessions, our investments, no matter how big or how small, our ideas, our time, our entire life. In the same way, we are stewards of creation. The earth on which we live is not ours to destroy. We are stewards of our church building and grounds, given for us to use for ministry and for mission and for worship, but we aren't entitled to sell it or tear it down. We've been temporarily entrusted with everything in this life so that we can better love and serve God and our neighbors. And here's the part that I needed to be reminded about all those years ago when I first read the book. All of it comes from God. God is the source of all that we have, everything. Everything is a gift that we receive from a God who sees us, knows us, and loves us. God yearns to be in relationship with us, and I think God will find every crack or every fissure or every fault line in our self-made, self-protective, self-preservationist facade to show us again and again what grace and mercy and love are. There's a phrase that I think really has developed and strengthened my own understanding of stewardship. And it's a phrase that's not in our prayer book, or at least I haven't been able to find it in our prayer book, and you won't find it in the leaflet either. It wasn't in the bulletin of the last church that I was serving at either, but I think it's going to sound familiar to you. It's said aloud when the offering is brought forward. The phrase comes from David, from King David, and it's recorded in the first book of Chronicles, right at the end of David's life, as his son Solomon is about ready to succeed him as king. So David is coming forward and he's offering up his treasure, his gold and his silver, so that Solomon will use it to build the temple in Jerusalem. The shortened version of it, what he says is this: all things come of thee, O Lord, and of thine own have we given thee. All things come of thee, O Lord, and of thine own have we given thee. That same idea was repeated and echoed in today's reading from Sirach. Give to the Most High as He has given you, as generously as you can afford. My friends, our worship, our entire lives are lived in thanksgiving to God. Back to the gospel. The gospel writer Luke explains, Jesus told a parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. And we hear about two characters, a Pharisee and a tax collector. The Pharisee in the story doesn't appear to need God, nor does he seem to acknowledge God's gifts. His self-righteousness gets in the way. He thought he was already doing everything perfectly. But rather than loving others, he looked down at them with contempt, and he busied himself in comparison. He busied himself in comparison. The world seems to tell us that what matters is what we have and what we can produce and how right we are. It says that we are valued based on those things, as if we are responsible for saving ourselves, and that we need to prove our worth by making or doing or building something. The world tells us that we are valued for what we do, not for who and whose we are. The truth is that you belong to God. You are God's beloved, cherished. And when you allow that truth to really deeply sink in, it changes you, and it changes how you live. Your entire life journey becomes learning to live in gratitude. With God, we are safe and strong, as the psalmist today says, like the sparrow in her house and the swallow in the nest. So my friends, there's no need to compare ourselves to others. There's no need to prove our worth. You are loved and you are free. Free to worship God more joyfully, free to care for others more deeply, and free to act more boldly as followers of Jesus Christ. So as we enter together this season of stewardship and ponder God's generosity towards us, may we remember, all things come of thee, O God, and of thine own have we given thee.